Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Alfi Prayoga. So, in this video, we are going to present to you about approach, method, and technique in ELT. First one is the definitions about approach, method, and technique. Then the second one is about several kind of approach, and then the third is about common methods, and the fourth is about technique, and then the last one is about the application ELT in the classroom. Okay, let's go to the part one definition. What is approach? Approach is an overview which applies to learning for all kind of learner in a set of principle, belief, or idea about the nature of learning which is translated into the classroom. For example, we learn from the psychology that a person's capacity to learn start from simple to complex, like a child learn from how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide number before he learns fraction and later on algebra. Because of this psychological basis, we choose the teaching approach as spiral. What is method? According to Edward Anthony, method is the plan of language teaching which consistent with the theories. Method is a way of doing things. Method deal is about how to teach. So method might mean different things to different people. For some it means a set of teaching procedure, for others the avoidance of teaching procedure, and then for some it's a primary of a language skill, and for others is a type of amount, vocabulary, and structure. Then the next is technique. According to Brown, teaching techniques are such steps we follow when we teach. It is a teacher's style or tricks to accomplish an immediate objective. Remember that to adapt our teaching to the kind of the student that we have, such that our instruction is different for every class and for every kind of students. Next is several kind of approach in ELT. First kind of approach is a structural approach. The structural approach is mainly employ the technique and the direct method, but the reading and writing skill are not wholly neglected. And then we have oral approach or situational language teaching. The oral approach is a method in which children to use whatever hearing they get from their surrounding. They also take help from the context to understand and use language. The target is to develop the skill in the individual so that he can communicate and function independently. This approach helps in the development of reading and writing skill. Then we have natural approach. The natural approach was actually based on the observation and understanding of the acquisition of the first and the second language in informal setting. Next we are going to part 3. Part 3 is talk about method. There are 8 kind of methods. The first one is direct methods. Then we have audiolingual methods. Then community language learning, and then we have total cycle response, and then communicative language teaching, suggestopedia, and silent way. Let's discuss one by one. First one is direct method. According to Hafiz Mutahara, direct method is a method which target language is used in teaching learning process without translating in the student. For example, Mr. Irham doesn't use bahasa when he teaching in the class. So this teacher or the lecturer is only use one language when he teaching. And then audiolingual method. Audiolingualism is a method of foreign language teaching where the emphasis on learning grammatical and phonological structure, especially for speaking and listening before reading and writing. For example, the teacher spends most of time in the class drilling the learner on the grammatical and phonological structure. And then the next method is CLL, Community Language Learning. It is a method primarily designed for monolingual conversation classes where the teacher counselor would be able to speak the learner. According to Wikipedia, CLL is a counseling method and treat as well as the personal and language problem a person encountered in the learning foreign language. And then the next one is total cycle response. This method is a language teaching method that gives a commands to the student in the target language with the body movement, and then the student respond with the whole body action. After this process, the child become able to speak and respond the language. CPR is very useful for beginners. CPR is also used for teaching students with dyslexia or related learning disabilities. And then the next one is communicative language teaching. Communicative language teaching is an approach to language teaching methodology that emphasizes authenticity, interaction, student-centered learning, task-based activities, and communication. Communicative language teaching was actually developed in opposition of audiolingual method, which is focused on drilling and memorization. Communicative language teaching focuses on developing the ability of communication in learners in real-life situations. It focuses on meaning rather than accuracy. The next method is Suggestopedia. Suggestopedia is a method of foreign language teaching developed by Lozanov. It makes use of dialogue, situation, and translation to present and practice language, and in particular make use of music, visual image, and relaxation exercise to make learning more comfortable, interested in order to learn more quickly. And then the last one is Silent Way. The Silent Way is a methodology of teaching language based on the idea that teachers should be as silent as possible during the class, but learners should be encouraged to speak as much as possible. There are three basic principles. First is the learner needs to discover or creative. And second is learning is made easier by the use of cycle objects such as Cuisinart rods. And then the third is learning is made easier by problem solving using the target language. So the eight methods are commonly used. The next material will be explained by my partner. Let's go to the next part.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So right now I'll be explaining the part 3 and part 4 of our presentation. So let's go ahead to the part 3 first. It's about techniques. So techniques in here have 3 stages. So the first one is about comprehension. Firstly, teacher have to use visual aids like pictures and gestures. And then the next one, we as a teacher have to modify our speech to aid the comprehension, like speak more slowly, emphasize the keywords, and simplify the use of vocabulary and grammar. And then the next one, we don't force the production. So the student will use English as a language whenever they are ready. And then the next one, we focus on attention on key vocabulary. And then let's move to the stage 2. It's about early speaking. So in here we want to bait our student to start to speak by yes or no answer, one word answer, list of word answer, and then two word strings and short phrases. The example for yes or no question is like, is Sandy wearing a t-shirt today? The answer will be no. And then the next one is one word answer. So the answer will consist of only one word. What does Sandy have in his hand? It is a mouse. And then list of words answer. The example is, what does Sandy have in his hand? It's a mouse and it is a cable. Okay, next one is about two word strings. Like, what do we see on the table now? It is a laptop and a smartphone, for example. And then the last one is short phrases answer. It's like, Sandy is wearing a blue shirt, but Alfie is wearing a blah 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 shirt. So the student will have to fill the blah blah blah, like a blue shirt, like that. And then let's continue to the stage 3. It's about speech emergence. So in speech emergence state, the speech production will normally improve in both quantity and quality. So the students need to be given the opportunity to use oral and written language whenever it's possible. So when they reach the stage in which speech is emerging beyond the two-word stage, there are many sort of activities with which will develop a better speech. So the activities is like games of all sorts, and then group discussion, and music, radio, and television, and the others. And then we move to the part 4, which is the application. So here in the first application there is grammar translation method. So the first one is classes are taught in the mother tongue with little active use of the target language. And then there is much vocabulary is taught in the form of list of isolated words. And then the long and elaborate explanation of grammar are given. So the grammar provides the rules for putting words together, and instruction will be often focused on the form and inflection of words. The next one is reading of difficult classical text will be begin early. And often the only drills are exercises in translation disconnected sentence from the target language into the mother tongue. And then the next application is direct method. So in here, the classroom instruction was conducted exclusively in the target language, and only everyday vocabulary and sentence will be taught. The oral communication skills were built up in a carefully threaded progression organized around question and answer exchange between the teacher and the students in small but intensive classes. And the grammar was taught inductively. And the new teaching points will taught through modeling and practice. And then the construct vocabulary was taught through demonstration, objects, and pictures. Both speech and listening comprehension were taught. Correct pronunciation and grammar will be emphasized. And then the next application is audio lingual. The new material is presented in dialogue form. There is dependence of mimicry and memorization of set phrases and overlearning. Structures are sequenced by means of constructive analysis and taught one at a time. And then the structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. And there is little or no grammatical explanation. So the grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather than by deductive explanation. And the vocabulary is strictly limited and learned in a context. There is much use of tapes, language labs, and visual aids. Great importance is attached to the pronunciation. Very little use of the mother tongue by teacher is permitted. Successful responses are immediately reinforced. There is great effort to get the student to produce error-free utterance, and there is a tendency to manipulate language and disregard content. And then the next part of application is community language learning. Learners in a classroom were regarded not as a class but as a group in need of certain therapy and counseling, and group members first needed to interact in a interpersonal relationship between the student and the teacher should be joined together to facilitate their learning. And then each person of the group should be lowered their defense to prevent or to minimize the open interpersonal communication between them. And then the next one is about total physical response. In here, the lesson might involve the teacher telling students to pick up something, maybe a pencil, a pen, or anything, and the teacher will ask to give it to the teacher. and the student will respond by doing the instruction if they understand. And when the student will be able to respond to the commands correctly, they can start giving instruction to the other classmates. And the student don't have to give instruction themselves until they are ready. And the next one is about communicative language teaching, or we can call it CLT. Activities in CLT typically involve students in real or realistic communication, where the successful achievement is the communicative task that they are performing is at least as important as the accuracy of their language use. So the student might simulate a television program or a scene at the airport, at the restaurant, or the other. And then students have to solve a puzzle and can only do so by sharing information or communicative with the other participants. And then the next one is Suggestopedia. In here, all conversation will stop for a minute or two, and the teacher will listen to the music coming from a tape recorder while he waits and listens to several places in order to enter into the mood of the music itself. And then he will begin to read or recite the text that heard from the tape recorder, and the student will follow the text in their textbook, where each lesson is translated into the mother tongue. And between the first and the second part of the concert, there are several minutes of silence. In some cases, even longer pause can be given to give students a time to process the learning. And at the end, the students silently leave the classroom. They are not told to do any homework on the lesson, and they have just had except for reading it cursorily once before they going to bed again, and again before getting up in the morning. And then the last application is silent way. Learning in silent way is facilitated if the learner discovers or creates rather than remembering or repeats what is to be learned. And the learning is facilitated by accompanying or meditating physical objects. And then the learning is facilitated by problem solving involving the mediating material to be learned. That's all from us, and thank you for paying attention to our presentation.